I'm Jennifer Trotu, the Director of Collections and Interpretation here at the Gamble House. Today we're looking at the kitchen, which is not just one room like we might think of it today, but multiple rooms that all support each other's functions and really form the nerve center of the house. This is really the service core that helps the rest of the house to function. It's the domain of the staff of the house and really was not used much by the family. Mrs. Gamble would have come in here to confer about menus and that sort of thing, but really this is the space that was used by the staff for all of their purposes that they needed to do to run the house. So in addition to this main room of the kitchen here, there's a few rooms around the exterior of this room that really support what happens in here. For example, this is the cold room. This is a space that is separate from the main room and has a pastry counter made of marble so that anything you need to prepare to keep cold on the counter, that marble will keep it cool. There's also a big ice box in there. The ice box itself would have been called a refrigerator at the time, but it's not what we think of as a refrigerator. It's actually made to have a compartment that will house a big block of ice to keep everything cool. Refrigeration as we know it didn't come in until the early 1920s. So this space is set aside. It has access from the delivery door outside, and you could just haul a big block of ice right in there and put it in an ice box like this. This isn't the ice box that the Gambles used, but it's one that was acquired for the house later and dates to about 1910. The next space we'll look at is the service porch. This space is the screen porch that was really kind of the crossroads of the interior, the exterior, and the kitchen and the basement. So anyone who was arriving with deliveries could be seen very clearly coming through the gate out here. They would come up to this back door, which is mostly glass, so you can see who's arriving. And then whoever was bringing things into the house could either bring them into the kitchen, into the cold room, a big block of ice, for example, through this door, or take them down into the basement. So this room, the glass in here really functions to bring light in, but it also allows for visibility of what's going on this side of the house. This space was also used as a day room for the staff of the house, where they could have a seat during the middle of the day and look over menus, whatever they needed to do. And the room has big sliding glass windows so that a lot of air and light can circulate through the space. The glass goes almost up to the ceiling. There are transom windows all along the top that can also be opened and also admit more light. So this space really allows for a lot of light to come in here and to pass into the interior of the house. We're always learning new things about the Gamble House, and one great example of that is this linoleum floor in here. For years, we were just looking at the maple floor that was underneath it, but we know that the experience that the Gambles had at the house was linoleum. This was a product that was developed in the 1860s and was a sheet good so that it didn't have grout lines like tile did. It's soft to walk on, and it's made of all natural material, so it's still in favor today. In about 2015, some photographs finally came to light that were in the Green and Green archives showing this room in the 1950s. The floor was still in place at that time, and those were the oldest photographs that we'd ever seen of this space. When people went to photograph architecture back in the early 20th century, they didn't really focus on things like the appearance of the kitchen. So we were lucky to have those photos. They told us that it was a dark and a light checkerboard. We were able to see the dimensions of the squares because we know that this base tile is 6 by 6 inches. So that determined what the layout of the grid would be. And then the question remained, what colors were actually used? Research in the Forbo archives, which is a company that still makes linoleum, showed us that there were only a few colors that were available in the early 20th century. One of them was a green, another was a rust color, another was a sort of lilac. So what was that darker color? Fortunately, we had Gamble family members who remember this kitchen from their childhood, and they were asked about it, and sure enough, they remembered once they were shown what the samples were, that it was green. So that green was the dark, and then a sort of butter color for the light, and that's what our floor shows now. So at the time, this would have been a sheet good, and it would have been just a continuous pattern on one piece of linoleum. However, they don't make this pattern anymore, so we had to have each of the squares especially hand cut for this job and then laid as if they were tile. And the job that was done is just immaculate. You can't see any joints between the tiles, and it looks like a sheet of linoleum just like it did in the early 20th century. This 1909 stove was a gift to the house, and it was the first time we'd really had a period appropriate stove in this room. So we can see what the scale of the stove would have been. It's a really large unit, but above it is this built-in hood that gives you an idea of how big a stove would have been for a house of this scale. This room has a lot of sinks in it, and that's because there was a sink for pretty much every purpose. There was a mop sink for the dirty work. This sink was for cleaning up pots and pans. And you can see it has drain boards that were built in next to it. We're going to go around to the butler's pantry where there are yet more sinks. This room is the butler's pantry. It acts as a buffer between the kitchen itself and the family zone of the dining room, which is right next to it. So this space is used for storing all of your china. You can see that there are sliding doors because this is a very confined space and you want to be able to just pass through it without doors opening into the space. This is a conventional feature that you'd find in any butler's pantry, East Coast, West Coast. This is the way it was done. So the glass of the cabinets helps you to see where everything is and immediately be able to get to what you need. And then this is the room where food is plated. So we have a pass through here. You can see that this door lifts up and the food can just be passed through here so that it can be plated in this room for service in the dining room. Once everything comes back from the dining room at the end of the meal, everything is cleaned here in these sinks, which are just dedicated to the tableware and the glassware, so that everything stays clean. And also this is a sink that has a very forgiving surface to it. It's a zinc sink that has a softer metal so that you're less likely to break things as you're washing them. This butler's pantry is the last of the 4 spaces over here that make up this kitchen complex. So at this point, we would move from the working areas of the house into the social spaces of the dining room where the family would have gathered. We'll take a look at that at another time. Thanks for joining us for this in-depth look at the kitchen.